Blood Winter is a Paw Patrol fanfiction. In this story, a teenager named Mark Hill is running through the snowy forest trying to find his car, but just before he finds it, a man wearing a hockey mask stepped out from behind a tree holding a bow and arrow. Mark tried to run away from the masked assailant, but the man shot an arrow through the back of his leg, causing him to fall to the ground. Mark was lying on the ground incapacitated, with the arrows still stuck in his leg. He looked and saw the man pick up an axe and was slowly approaching him. Mark backed away from the man as he was getting closer to him with the axe. Mark turned and saw his car off in the distance. Mark saw this as an opportunity to get out of here. He tried to stand, but he felt an excruciating pain in his leg from when the arrow hit him. Mark just laid there in a bloody heap, thinking about what to do. He knew that there was only one thing to do, and that was just to get up and run. Mark managed to pull the arrow out of his leg and tossed it to the side. He then tried standing up, but his legs were still shaky and weak. However, just as he managed to pull himself up, the man came out of nowhere and swung the axe straight into Mark's mouth, causing blood to spray everywhere and stain the purely white snow in a crimson red. Mark was lying on the ground with the axe still in his mouth, shaking like a leaf. The man just stood there and watched his victim slowly bleed out. After a little bit, Mark eventually died from losing too much blood as he squeezed his car keys in his hand, holding onto them for dear life. Then, all of a sudden, Mark's car alarm went off. The man turned his head and saw that the car alarm was going off. He opened the hood and forcefully ripped out the car battery, throwing it to the side. He then dragged Mark's body away into the snowy forest, never to be seen again. Meanwhile, Everest was taking a walk by herself in the snow until she smelled something. It was a strange scent. It was very strong, but also sickly at the same time. Everest decided to follow the scent. It took her some time, but she eventually found something very shocking. It was a puddle of blood laying underneath a tree. There was also a blue Range Rover that appeared to be damaged, and the battery was laying a few feet away from it. Everest was shocked by what was presented to her, but then her nose picked up another scent. This one was very unfamiliar to her, but she decided to follow it. She began looking around for anything she could use to follow the scent, until she found a trail of blood leading into the forest. Everest knew something was wrong, and she wanted to call the others, but decided against it. Maybe it was someone in trouble and Everest had to help. So she decided to follow the trail into the forest. Everest kept following the trail until she found something very strange. It was a large man wearing a hockey mask dragging a body. Everest decided to follow him to see where he was going, but within seconds she lost sight of him. And to make matters worse, she was now lost in the forest with no way back. She tried calling the others, but all she got was static. It turns out she was too deep into the forest for her pup tag to work. So Everest had no other choice but to just keep walking and see if she can find anyone who can help her. And with that, she began walking. Meanwhile, Jake was preparing Everest's favorite meal. As he was finishing up dinner for himself and Everest, he realized it's been nearly an hour since Everest went out for a walk, and she hasn't come back yet. So Jake decided to go looking for her, but he couldn't find her anywhere. Then Jake got a call from one of his friends, Diana, who lived in a cabin on Crystal Lake. Jake answered the phone, and Diana sounded very scared. She informed him that her son Mark went for a hike in the snow about 2 hours ago, but he hasn't come home yet. She hasn't heard from him in over 2 hours, and she's starting to get worried. Jake was shocked to hear that, but then he knew what to do. He decided to call the Paw Patrol to see if they could help. Meanwhile, at the lookout, the pups were playing in the snow having a great time. And Ryder was in the lookout drinking hot chocolate until he got a call on his pup pad. Ryder answered the call and it was Jake. He then noticed that Jake had a very panicked expression on his face. Ryder asked him what the problem was. Jake informs him that Everest went for a walk in the snow about 2 hours ago and she hasn't come back yet, and he was already starting to get worried about her. And in addition to this, he also told him that a teenage boy named Mark Hill was missing. Ryder then reassures him that they will find them and bring them home safely. He then calls the pups to the lookout. The pups all go into the elevator, but Marshall ends up slipping on the ice and he accidentally bowls the pups over as they all begin to laugh. The elevator rose up to the top floor. As soon as the elevator reached the top, the pups all jumped out and stood in a neat line with their uniforms and gear all ready to go. The pups realized that Ryder had a very unnerved look on his face. He told them that he had received a call from Jake a few minutes ago, telling him that Everest was missing. The pups were shocked about this, especially Marshall, who cared about Everest the most. But then what Ryder said next wasn't any better. He also informed the pups that a teenager named Mark Hill went for a hike in the snow and went missing. The pups were even more shocked now. Ryder picked the pups he would need for this mission first. He picked Chase because they could use his spy equipment and tracking skills to help find Everest, and Mark Sky's logo came next. Ryder picked her because they might need air support during this mission. But Ryder needed one more pup for this mission, and that pup was Marshall. Marshall was happy because he thought this would be the perfect opportunity to tell Everest how he felt. They'll need Marshall because when they eventually find Everest and Mark, they might be injured from running in the forest, and they might need urgent medical attention. And that's where Marshall comes in. After that was done, Ryder, Chase, Sky, and Marshall were already on their way to Jake's mountain. Once they got there, they saw that another car was parked outside of the cabin. It was Diana's car. Ryder and the pups entered the cabin, and they saw Jake sitting on the couch with Diana, who had black mascara running down her eyes from crying too much. Marshall felt bad for her and went to go comfort her. Ryder walked up to Diana and asked her a few questions about Mark. She thinks back to the last time she saw him, which was earlier this morning when he left to go take some pictures out on a hike. As it turns out, earlier this morning Mark was searching on Google for something to do, and he found pictures of an old abandoned camp. With that, he grabbed his bag and his camera and went out to explore the camp. Once he got to the camp, he began taking pictures of an old cabin. However, while he was snapping the pictures, he heard some weird noises. Thinking it was probably just a wild animal, he went back to taking pictures. However, while he was scrolling through the pictures, he noticed something quite strange. He saw what looked like the silhouette of a large man standing behind the cabin. He looked around the cabin, but he couldn't find anyone. However, the door suddenly burst open to reveal Jason Voorhees, the same man who had pursued Mark and killed him. Mark was so scared that he dropped the camera and fled into the snowy forest. Jason followed him, and that's how it happened. Ryder reassured Diana that they would find Mark and bring him home safely. He then turned to the three pups and told them that they were going to split up to look for Everest and Mark. Marshall would go with Ryder to look for Mark, and Chase would go with Sky to look for Everest. And within seconds, Ryder and the pups were already gone to look for the missing teenager and the missing husky. Meanwhile, Everest was still walking around in the snowy forest, trying to find her way back home. She realized that the sky was getting darker and darker, and the snow began to fall at a rapid pace. And in addition to this, her paws were sore from walking too much, and she was also getting cold as well. But she had to keep going, and that's exactly what she did. She kept walking until she collapsed from exhaustion. After a while, she slowly opened her eyes and saw something in front of her. When she fully regained her vision, she saw that it was an abandoned camp. She had never seen this part of the mountain before, but she decided to investigate. Who knows, maybe there could be someone in there that could help her. But of course, there was only one way to find out. As soon as Everest entered the camp, the first thing she saw was that the place was completely abandoned. The cabins were all empty, and there wasn't anyone else around. But she couldn't give up. There had to be someone around here somewhere. So she decided to keep searching the camp, a decision she would soon regret, because little did she know, she was not alone. There was someone here with her, a certain someone she would meet very soon.